We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Beis and Beis in Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 72b. The Gemara is in the middle of discussing the Shita of Rav Huna. On the previous Amar, Rav Huna said that in the case of the Mishnah, let's say the husband says to the wife, Hareza gitech imati, this is your get if I die. So the Mishnah said it's not a good get at all because it's considered to be a get lachar misa. But Rav Huna said that it's a suffix whether it's a good get or not a good get. And the Gemara had explained that Rav Huna follows the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi in general holds as mano shel shtar mochiach, all of the fact that there's a date written in the get that proves that the person wanted it to take effect at the time of the date. And the same thing is true by get. Since there's a date in the get, we assume that even though he said Hareza gitech imati, it sounds like it's a get lachar misa, but really it means it's going to be a get from the date. It's going to be a get retroactively, and it's going to be kosher. And so the Gemara asked, but according to Rabbi Yossi, it should be a completely kosher get. It shouldn't be a situation of a suffix whether it's a good gerushin or not. And the Gemara is trying to determine what is the suffix of Rav Huna. And the Gemara now suggests that Rav Huna is mesupik. I amar Rabbi Yossi bal peh ilo amar. Did Rabbi Yossi say his halacha even in a situation where the imati part, let's say by the get, was said verbally? In other words, Rabbi Yossi's halacha, when he talked about zmano shel shtar mochiach olav, he was talking about a situation where the condition was written into the shtar and the date was in the shtar, and therefore we say zmano shel shtar mochiach olav. But over here you have a date written into the get, but then he just says hareza gitech imati. So maybe that's different. Maybe Rabbi Yossi wouldn't say it in that situation. That's why Rav Huna said it's a suffix gerushin. Rashi explains Baal Peh, Kagon Gabe get. For example, by our case of get, Shekasav Kilchaso, it's written in the normal fashion according to halacha. Then when he gives it to her, he says, "This is your get if I die," which sounds like a get lachar misa again. So Hilkach, therefore, lo dami l'shtar. It's not similar to a conventional shtar. Shekevan shekasav hatanai eitzel hazman b'shtar. Because in the case of shtar that Rabbi Yossi was talking about, that was the case in Bava Basra. The condition was written into the shtar next to the date. So ikolamemer does man mochiach to mehayom kamer. Then you could say that the date that's written in the shtar shows that he intends everything to be chal mehayom. It's going to be chal from today. Aval al peh, but if he says verbally, he says hareza gitech imati. So dilma ki mosrei nehila. Maybe when he gave it to her, hadar bei mizman de shtara. Maybe he's saying he's not following the date. He's retracting from the date that's written in the shtar. Umosrei nehila manas lachar misa. And maybe he's really giving it to her that it should be chal lachar misa. Hoel v'lo amar mehayom. Since he didn't say the word mehayom when he made this verbal condition, when he said that this is your get imamati, he didn't say mehayom. So maybe he's not going by the date in the shtar. Maybe that's the suffix of Rav Huna. Again, Yamar Rabbi Yossi Baal Peh Ilo Amar. Did Rabbi Yossi say is halach even Baal Peh or not? But the Gemara says to that, but does he really have a doubt about whether Rabbi Yossi said is halach in a case where it's verbal? Vatnan, but we learned in a Mishnah, Hareza gitech. Let's say the husband says to his wife, "This is your get. Im lo basi mikan v'ad yud beis chodesh." If I don't return within 12 months. And then he dies within the 12 months. So the halacha is eino get. The halacha is it's not going to be a get. And Rashi explains why is it not a get? Eino get, the haloshavia get ad yud beis chodesh. Because in this case, what he's essentially saying is hareza gitech im lo basi mikan yud beis chodesh. This is your get if I don't come within 12 months. It's really the get is chal after the 12 months. V'avalei get lachar misa. Now over here where he died within the 12 months, so it's true that he didn't come, he didn't return, but he already had died at that point in time. It's a get lachar misa, and therefore it's no good. But Tani Alon, we learned on that Mishnah, Rabboseinu hitiru lihinase, that in that case, even though we just said that it's not a good get, but the Rabboseinu, our rabbis, they allowed her to remarry in that situation. Ve'aminu, we say over there, Man Rabboseinu, who are we talking about when we mentioned the Rabboseinu? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, who is it referring to? Beidina desharu mishcha. That's referring to the Bezdin that permitted oil. V'savri look Rabbi Yossi, and they hold like the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, meaning the reason why the Rabboseinu say that it's permitted for her to remarry, and we say that it is a good get. The reason why it's considered a good get is because they hold like Rabbi Yossi. The Amar Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Olav, that Rabbi Yossi says the date in the shtar proves that it's chal from the time of the get, that from the time of the date rather in the shtar, and that's true over here also. It's chal from the time of the date in the get. It's chal retroactively, and you see this was a situation where also again there was a verbal condition. It wasn't written into the get, and still Rabbi Yossi says his halacha of Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Olav. And Rashi explains, Beidina de Sharu Mishcha, again, this is the court that allowed oil. That refers to Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Rashi says that refers to Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. That's the Bezdin. Shehiter Shamnan Shalov de Kochavim b'Meseches Avodah Zarah. The Bezdin of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya allowed the oil of idol worshippers. That's found in Meseches Avodah Zarah. That's the Bezdin over here that says that she's permitted to remarry. And again, that follows the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. We see that Rabbi Yossi says this even in a situation by a verbal condition. And we should point out over here that the reason why Rabbi Hussein will allow her to remarry because it's a good get, the idea over here is that since it's a good get, there's no obligation of yibum. Whereas the Mishnah, when it talks about the fact again that he died within the 12 months and it's not a good get, so now she has an obligation of yibum, that's why she's not permitted to remarry. She has to fulfill this obligation of yibum. And in any case, the Gemara continues, Ella, rather, what was Rav Huna's doubt? Why was he in doubt in the situation of Hareze Gita Chemati? The reason he was in doubt was because Misafka Lehi Halacha, Rabbi Yossi Balpeh Oein Halacha. He was in doubt whether the Halacha is like Rabbi Yossi in a situation where the Tanai was made Balpeh, or is the Halacha not like Rabbi Yossi? In other words, the Gemara is saying, we know certainly that Rabbi Yossi holds Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Olav, even in a situation where the condition, the Imati, is not written into the Shtar. Rabbi Yossi would certainly say that it is going to be a kosher get because we say Zmanu Shel Shtar Mochiach Olav. But Rav Huna was in doubt, do we paskin like Rabbi Yossi even in a situation of Baal Peh or not? But the Gemara says to that, Umi Mesafkale. But was Rav Huna really in doubt whether the halacha was like Rabbi Yossi in a case of Baal Peh? V'amar Rava, but Rava said, Hareze Gita Chemati. Let's say a person says, the same case as our Mishnah, person says, this is your get if I die, Visha Animes, or let's say he uses the language of Visha Animes. Also, that's also going to be considered the same language. Hareze get, that's going to be a kosher get, according to Rava. Rava seems to be following the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, that we say Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Olav. However, if he says Kisha Amos, when I die, Ula'achar Misa, he says the language of La'achar Misa, so in that case, Ein Zaget, that's certainly not a get. The reason why that's not a get is because that actually does imply that it's only going to be a get after death, and we say Ein Get La'achar Misa. And the Gemara now explains, Heichi Dami, what exactly is the case that Rav is talking about? If the case is he's not simply saying imati, but he's saying mehayom, the Rabbanan, and Rav is following the sheet of the Rabbanan that argue with Rabbi Yossi. Does that even need to be said? It's obvious if you say mehayom. But we learned in the Mishnah, mehayom imati harei get. The Mishnah says explicitly. Our Mishnah says if you say mehayom imati, if the husband says mehayom imati, it is a kosher get. We know it's a kosher get in a situation where the husband says mehayom. So that can't be what Rav is trying to teach us if it's an explicit Mishnah. Rather, is it not Rav is talking about a case where he simply says Hareza Gita Chemati? He doesn't say the word Mehayom, Rabbi Yossi, and Rav is following the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, and you see that Shema Mina, you see that according to that, Halacha Rabbi Yossi, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, even in a situation where it's Baal Peh. So according to Rav, we see the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, even in a situation where it's Baal Peh, and we say Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Olav. So what was the doubt that Rav Huna said? Why did Rav Huna say that in this case it's a doubt whether she's divorced or not? And the Gemara answers to that, L'Rava Pshitale. According to Rav, it was obvious. Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi, and Rav holds the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, even in the case of Baal Peh. But Rav Huna Misafkale, but according to Rav Huna, that's exactly his doubt, even though according to Rav, it's obvious that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi in the case of Baal Peh, that was not obvious to Rav Huna. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say, Liolam Damar Mehayom. Really, maybe Rav's case really is where he did say Mehayom. He said Mehayom Imati. Now that seems obvious because the Mishnah already says Mehayom Imati is kosher, V'Rabbanan, and again, maybe Rav is following the Rabbanan, but again, what's the Chiddush? And to that, the Gemara says, V'hani lishni etzrichale. The Chiddush is the other languages that Rava taught us. We of course know that Hareze Gite Chemati, if he says Mehayom, it's kosher, but what about the other languages? Sha'ani Meis, Ke'imati, we want to teach us that Sha'ani Meis is the same as Ke'imati, Ke'imati Dami, it's the same as Ke'imati, Kesha'amos, and the fact that if you say Kesha'amos, Kela'achar Misa Dami, that's the same as saying La'achar Misa. And the Gemara continues, V'iko Damasni La'asefa, there are those who learn the teaching of Rav Huna, going on the later case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Zegitech La'achar Misa, if the husband says to the wife, this is your get after death, that's considered again a get La'achar Misa, so Lo Amar Klum, he hasn't said anything. that's not going to be a good get at all. That's what the Mishnah said. And Amar Rav Huna, and Rav Huna said on that line in the Mishnah, Uladivrei Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi, who says Zmano shel shtar mochiach olav, the fact that there's a date written in the get, it's as if he said Mehayom, so it becomes like a case of Mehayom ulachar misa. So according to that, Choletzes, according to Rabbi Yossi, it would be Chalitza in that case, meaning it would be a suffix gerushin. In a case where the husband says to the wife, Zeg gitech lachar misa, according to Rabbi Yossi, it would be the equivalent of Mehayom ulachar misa. And the reason it's the equivalent of Mehayom is because the date is written in the get. And as we said at the end of the Mishnah, by a case of Mehayom ulachar misa, that's a suffix because we don't know whether he means to say that it should be retroactive, it should be Chal Mehayom, in which case it would be good, or does he mean to say that it's Chal Achar Misa, which is not going to be good? And the Gemara says, Pshita, if that's the statement of Rav Huna, isn't it obvious? Midaseifel Rabbanan Choletz is from the fact that the end case of the Mishnah, meaning the case we just mentioned of Mehayom Ula Achar Misa, from the fact that case, according to the Rabbanan, she does Chalitza because it's a suffix, whether it's a good Gerushin or not. So Reishanami, the Rabbi Yossi Choletz. So the earlier case, in a case where you only have a situation where he says La Achar Misa, where he says Zegitech La Achar Misa, Rabbi Yossi certainly would say it's the same thing as Mehayom Uli Achar Misa. And of course Rabbi Yossi would say Choletzes. That's the identical case of the Rabbanan's case of Mehayom Ulachar Misa. So what's Rav Huna even teaching us? And the Gemara says to that, Ma'u Detema, what might you have said? Rabbi Yossi Baha Kirebi Svirle. Maybe Rabbi Yossi holds like the sheet of Rebbe. We're going to see Rebbe later on. Rebbe holds the Amar Gita Ma'al Yahave. Rebbe says that in the case of Mehayom Ulachar Misa, it's a completely kosher get. The Chalitza Nami Lo Tiboy, and Chalitza is not needed as well. Kamash Malon, that's what Rav Huna is teaching us. The low Rebbe Savar La Rabbi Yossi. The low Rabbi Yossi Savar La Rebbe. He's teaching us that Rebbe does not hold like Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi does not hold like Rebbe. And the Gemara now elaborates. Rebbe lo savar lo Rabbi Yossi. Rebbe doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. The katani kozeh get, because the way he phrases it is, this is considered a good get. L'mu'utei de Rabbi Yossi, meaning in this case, to exclude Rabbi Yossi's case. Again, the Gemara will explain. Rabbi Yossi lo savar lo Rebbe, and Rabbi Yossi, he doesn't hold like Rebbe. The katani kozeh get, because he also has that language of kozeh get, l'mu'utei de Rebbe, to exclude the case of Rebbe. And the Gemara now brings the case of Rebbe, and brings the case of Rabbi Yossi. Rebbe Maihi, where did Rebbe use this language of kazaget? The Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, Mehayom Ulachar Misa. Let's say the person said to his wife when he's giving the get, he says Mehayom Ulachar Misa. That's essentially the same case as our Mishnah. So get, ve'eino get, divrei chachamim. It's a get, but it's not a good get, meaning it's a suffix gerushin. According to the chachamim, that's like the opinion that we find in our Mishnah. And Rebbe Omer, but Rebbe says, kazeh get, this is considered to be a kosher get. In a situation of Mehayom Ulachar Misa, it's still a kosher get. And the point is, again, Rabbi Yossi does not agree that that's going to be a kosher get. That's what Rav Huna is teaching us. We might have thought that Rabbi Yossi holds like Rebbe, and Rav Huna teaches us that is not the case. And also, again, Rebbe's not going to hold like Rabbi Yossi. That's why Rebbe says kazeh get, to exclude Rabbi Yossi's case. What's Rabbi Yossi's case? Rabbi Yossi, Mahi, what's the case of Rabbi Yossi? The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, Kisvu utanu get liishti. If he says, write and give a get to my wife, im lo basi mikan ve'ad yud beis chodesh, if I don't come from now for 12 months, kasvu besoch yud beis chodesh, if they write it within the 12 months, v'nasnu la'achar yud beis chodesh, and then they give it after the 12 months, eino get, it's not a kosher get. Rabbi Yossi Omer kazeh get. Rabbi Yossi says in this case, it is going to be a kosher get, and again he says kazeh in this case, means to say in this case, but not in the case of Rebbe. And Rashi explains the katani kazeh get, because it says kazeh get b'milsei de Rebbe, in the words of Rebbe, meaning Rebbe said, in the case of Mehayom Ulachar Misa, kazeh get, in this case it's a kosher get, and lemu'utei de Rabbi Yossi, that excludes Rabbi Yossi, and Rashi explains which Rabbi Yossi is Rebbe excluding, heicha de lo amar Mehayom, that's our Rabbi Yossi that we're discussing over here in this entire sugya. Let's say he didn't say Mehayom, and again Rabbi Yossi says even if you don't say Mehayom, it's as if you said Mehayom, because we say that these mano shel shtar, the date that's in the get, it proves that it's supposed to be Mehayom. But according to Rebbe, that's not true. Heicha de lo amar Mehayom, in a situation where he didn't say Mehayom, it's not going to be kosher, because he doesn't consider, according to Rebbe, we don't say Zmano shel shtar mochiach olav. Tekevan dekatani kazeh, because since Rebbe says that language of kazeh, mashma dechiyai gavnahu demachsher, that sounds like Rebbe saying it's only in this case that it's kosher. Avol belav Mehayom pasul, but if he doesn't actually say Mehayom, it's going to be pasul. That's the idea that Rebbe does not agree with Rabbi Yossi, and then Rabbi Yossi, he also uses the language of kazeget, and again, that's the case we brought with the 12 months. To katani kazeget, Rabbi Yossi got betanoi lekamon. Rabbi Yossi is by the Tanoim later on. V'al karchach l'mu'udayasin. When Rabbi Yossi says in this case, again, where they wrote it within the 12 months, he said, write and give a get to my wife if I don't come from now, 12 months from now, and then they wrote it within the 12 months, but then gave it after 12 months, so Rabbi Yossi said, kazeget. In that case, that kazeh must be excluding something. We don't find anything to exclude. It must be what he's excluding is this case of mehayom ulachar misa, meaning to say Rabbi Yossi is saying, even though Rebbe says that it's kosher by mehayom ulachar misa, Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi says that by mehayom ulachar misa, like Rav Huna is saying, we say that in such a situation it's a suffix gerushin and it's choletzes, and the idea is ulashmi'inon. The idea is that Rabbi Yossi is teaching us the afagav degabi matana kosher. This is something that Rashi mentioned earlier. Even though by matana, if you say mehayom ulachar misa, it's kosher, so hasam hudachi kamarle, there it's because we have a way of interpreting the words mehayom ulachar misa. It means gufa mehayom, it means the principle is from today. Uperi lachar misa, but you'll only get the fruits after death. Avol beget, but when it comes to get, kevan the lav lashon tanayu, since it's not really a language of a condition, havale suffix tana, suffix hazara. It becomes a doubt, as we said, whether this is a condition or whether this is a retraction, and that's why Rabbi Yossi says in this situation of mehayom ulachar misa, or again, even if there is no mehayom, but just the date counts as mehayom, that's the same thing as mehayom ulachar misa, it's going to be a suffix gerushin in that situation. And Rashi continues, Rabbi Yossi Mahi, what was the case where Rabbi Yossi said the language of Heicha Katani Kazaget? Where did he use this language of Kazaget? And again, the language was in that case where they wrote it within 12 months and gave it after 12 months. Why does Rabbi Yossi say that's kosher? Rabbi Yossi Omer Kazaget, Rabbi Yossi says it's considered a good get. Because he should have said, Im lo basi kisvu utanu. He should have said, if I don't come, then write it and give it. But that's not how he phrased it. V'amar kisvu utanu im lo basi. The way that he phrased it was, kisvu utanu, write it and give it if I don't come, and therefore Rabbi Yossi understands that to mean hachi kamar. What Rabbi Yossi understands that to mean is as follows: kisvu achshav, write it right now, utanu im lo basi, and then give it if I don't come. And that's why Rabbi Yossi says it's okay, even though they wrote it within the 12 months and then gave it after the 12 months. Rabbi Yossi understands that that's still okay, unlike the Tana Kama. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Zegitech mehayom imati mecholizeh. Let's say the husband says to his wife, this is your get from today. If I die from this illness, then he gets better, he walks around in the marketplace, then he gets sick and he dies. We have to evaluate, did he die from the first illness, from the original illness or not? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna says, Gito kematanaso. The halacha by gerisha, the halacha by divorce is the same thing as when it comes to a matana, talking about a shchiv meira, talking about a gift that's given by someone who's on his deathbed. Ma matanaso im amar choser. Just like the halacha is that if a shchiv meira gives a gift on his deathbed, so once he gets better, that gift is automatically retracted. Af gito, so too, if a person is giving a get in such a situation, im amar choser, if he gets better, so then the get is going to be retracted. And Rashi explains, Gito de shchiv meira kematanaso, the get again of a shchiv meira, an individual on his deathbed, is treated the same as a gift that's given on the deathbed. Ma matanasu amrinu mebaba basra mamar choser. Just like we say by a gift, if he gets better, so the gift is retracted. Af gito imamad choser, so too by gerisha, the same thing. V'lomi boy hecha do amar imamati. We don't even need to say it in a situation where he says, if I die, the holomes, because there was a condition and he didn't end up dying. Ela afilu lo amar imati. Let's say he didn't say, even if he didn't say, if I die. Ela yoav lo gets dama. Let's say he just gave her a get. Im amar choser, if he's a shchim meira and he gets better, we assume that's a retraction. The mistama adaita demisa yoav lo v'halomes, because mistama he gave it on the understanding he was going to die, so he's trying to have it that she's divorced instead of having her be a widow and avoid problems of yibum, etc. Mistama, that's why he gave it, and so therefore if he didn't die, so then we say that he's choser in that case. That's the idea of gito kematanoso. Just like by matan, if he gets better, we retract it. We say it's retracted. So too, that's the halacha by gerisha. And Rav Huna continues, Uma gito, and just like by gerisha, just like by his get, afal gav de lo parish, even though he didn't explain everything. Kevan damar ksovu, since he said, as long as he said write it, afal gav de lo amar tenu, even though he didn't say give it, we assume he means to give it. Af matana, so similarly it's true by matana. Kevan damar tenu, once he says to give it, afal gav de lo kanu mine, even though there was no formal kinyan made, it's still going to be effective. That's the comparison in the other direction. And Rashi explains, Afagav de lo amar tenu, when it comes to Gedisha, even though he didn't say tenu, Keditanan beha-omer hiskaba, like we say in ha-omer, Rabbi Shimon Shazuri Omer, Rabbi Shimon Shazuri says, Av ha-mesuk, and even somebody who's in danger of dying, Kevan damar kisu, as long as he says kisu, Afagav de lo amar tenu, even though he doesn't say tenu, even though he doesn't say give it, Adai de l'mesav kamer, we understand that's what he means. He wants to give the get, and so by Matana also, you don't need to have a formal kinyan, even the statement of tenu, that can act as a kinyan. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, we're going to take what we learned in our Mishnah and compare it to the statement of Rav Huna. The Mishnah said, Zagitech mehayom imati mecholize. Again, he says, this is your get from today if I die from this particular illness. V'amad, he gets better. V'holach b'shuk, he walks around in the marketplace. V'cholov, amaze, then he gets sick again and he dies. Omdemosa, we evaluate him in machmas choli harishon meis, if he really died from the original illness. So that's a fulfillment of the condition. Hareza get, so then it's a good get. And in malav, and if not, if he died from something else, not the original illness, so ain't no get, it's not going to be a good get. And so it sounds like it's saying from here that he got better, and here we're saying that it could be a good get. V'yamridim amad choser. So the Gemara now asks, if you're going to say like Rav Huna that if he gets better, so that's an automatic retraction, so lamali umdana, so what do we need to make any evaluation for? Harei amad, if he got better, and in this case he got better, the get should be batal, that should be it. There should be no need for an evaluation to determine, did he die from the original illness? It doesn't make any difference. He got better, and therefore the get is batal. As Rashi explains, Harei amad uvatal haget me'elav. He got better, and therefore the get should be batal automatically. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Marbrei de Rav Yosef, Mishmei de Rava, Marbrei de Rav Yosef says in the name of Rava, the case in our mission is not really that he got better, rather, Shenitik mecholi lecholi, he just went from one illness to another illness. That's why we need an evaluation. What did he die from? Is this considered a death from the original illness, or is it a new illness that caused the death? And the Gemara says, can you really explain the Mishnah that way? Amad Katani, but it says in the Mishnah he got better. And the Gemara says, no, that's not what it means. So Amad Mecholi Zeh just means he got better from illness number one, from this illness, B'nafal Lecholi Acher, and then he came to another illness. But the Gemara says, V'halach B'shuk Katani, but it says he walked around in the marketplace. It certainly sounds like he got better. And the Gemara says to that, Halach al Meshanto, it doesn't mean he really walked around. It means he walked around with the help of a staff. He used something to assist him. He wasn't completely better. And Rashi explains, Al Meshanto, again, he walked with the use of his staff. Nishan al Makolo Leolam Cholo, who is using a staff. He was sick the whole time. And Rashi adds, V'hadanak halach, the reason why we say over here halach, that he walked around, Lav mishum da'amidahi. The Mishnah is not trying to say that he got better. The Tailif Mina that we should learn from here, Amar Eino Choser, that if a person gets better, it's not a retraction. That's not what's going on in the Mishnah. Elo Kamash Malon, rather what it's teaching is as follows. Taima dehalachu deboy umdana imachmas choli harishon meis. It's only because he walked around. That's why we need to make an evaluation and say, did he really die from the first illness? The ikol amechash hoel v'halach, because there's a concern now since he got up and walked around. Nitzol me'oso hacholi, maybe really that illness is finished. Umeis mecholi acher, maybe he died from something else. Vuamar mecholi zen. His statement was it has to be from this illness. It has to be from the original illness. In other words, the walking around, it's not the idea that he walked around, and therefore we say since he walked around, so he got better. We should learn out this halacha of Amar Eino Choser. Has nothing to do with that. He didn't get completely better. The point is he walked around, and therefore we have reason to believe that maybe the death is not from the original illness. Maybe there was some kind of change, and it's really from the second illness, and therefore it would not be a question. According to that understanding, we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph.